The gunshot echoed through the valley as Brynn Daniels stood frozen in the doorway of her father's general store, watching the lone figure on horseback disappear into the dusty horizon of Fort Worth, Texas. It was 1876, and that man, the one folks called Untouchable Kane, had just saved her father from a robbery. Yet not a single person had stepped forward to thank him before he vanished like a ghost in the midday sun. Who was that? Bryn asked, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear as she helped her father gather the scattered merchandise. Her father's face paled. Kane O'Malley. Best stay clear of him, Bryn. Man's got the devil riding his shadow. He just saved your life, Pa. Even rattlesnakes serve a purpose sometimes, her father muttered. Don't mean you ought to invite them to dinner. At 22, Bryn had heard all the whispers about Kane O'Malley, how he'd ridden with outlaws before settling outside town 3 years ago, how no man could beat his draw, how his ranch hands quit within weeks, claiming he never removed his shirt even in the blistering Texas heat. Some said he'd been cursed by a Comanche medicine man, others that he'd survived a Mexican firing squad that left him marked for death. But standing there among the scattered flour and beans, watching the dust settle in his wake, Bryn felt something stir inside her that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with curiosity. He comes in every month for supplies, her father said, reading her thoughts. Pays in gold and barely speaks 10 words. Best you're not here when he returns. But Bryn had already decided she would be. 4 weeks later, when Kane O'Malley's tall frame filled the doorway of Daniels' general store, Bryn was alone behind the counter. Her heart raced as his eyes, green as spring grass after rain, met hers. His face was deeply tanned, weathered by sun and wind, with a sharp jawline softened only by the slightest shadow of a beard. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, white against his skin. Despite the summer heat, he wore a long-sleeved shirt buttoned to the neck, leather gloves, and a duster that reached his boots. "Mr. O'Malley," she said, lifting her chin, "I've prepared your usual order." His expression revealed nothing, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "You're Daniel's daughter, Bryn," she offered. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did last month." Kane set a small pouch on the counter. "No need, just happened to be there. 3 men with guns just happened to back down when you walked in." She pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "I find that hard to believe." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "People believe what they want about me, Miss Daniels. And what should I believe?" His smile vanished. "That I'm just a man trying to mind his business." He took the supplies she'd prepared and turned to leave. "I've added some fresh baked bread," Bryn called after him. "No charge." Kane paused at the door, his back to her. "Kindness is wasted on me, Miss Daniels." "I don't believe that for a second, Mr. O'Malley." After he left, Martha Wilcox from the dress shop burst through the door. "Brynn Daniels, was that Kane O'Malley I just saw leaving, and you in here all alone with him?" "He's a customer, Mrs. Wilcox. He's dangerous is what he is." "Why, Sheriff Taylor himself said that man's killed more men than the cholera." She leaned over the counter. "They say he's got marks all over his body, satanic symbols burned into his flesh. That's why he never takes off that shirt, not even at the river in July." "People say a lot of things," Bryn replied, counting the gold coins Kane had left. "Your poor father would have a conniption if he knew." But her father did know, and the argument that evening shook the little house behind the store. "I won't have my daughter consorting with that man," Jacob Daniels shouted. "Not after losing your mother and brother to violence. I couldn't bear to lose you too." Bryn softened. Her father had never recovered from the wagon accident 6 years ago that took half their family. "Pa, he's just a customer." "And if he were truly dangerous, Wouldn't Sheriff Taylor have run him out of town by now? The sheriff leaves him be because O'Malley keeps to himself and deals with troublemakers so the law doesn't have to. Her father sighed. Promise me you'll stay away from him, Bryn. But promises were hard to keep when Kane O'Malley started appearing in her dreams. The next time he came to town, a torrential rain had turned Fort Worth's Main Street into a river of mud. Kane entered the store, water running from his duster, and found Bryn struggling with a leak in the roof, a bucket already overflowing. Without a word, he took off his duster, climbed up on the counter, and began examining the damage. It's been leaking for days, Bryn explained. Pa's back is too bad for him to fix it. Kane nodded and disappeared outside. He returned with tools from his saddlebag and spent the next hour repairing the leak, while Bryn pretended to arrange stock, stealing glances at him. Even in the cool air, sweat beaded on his forehead, yet he never loosened a button on his shirt which clung to his broad shoulders. "You didn't have to do that," she said when he finished. "Seems I did." His eyes met hers. "You've been kind to me, not many are. Perhaps if you weren't so determined to be alone, more people would see what I see." "And what's that?" His voice was soft, almost vulnerable. "A good man." Something flickered in his eyes, pain or longing, she couldn't tell before he masked it. "You don't know me, Miss Daniels. I'd like to." Kane stepped back as if her words had physically struck him. "No, you wouldn't." He gathered his tools. "I'll be back for my supplies next month." But it was only 2 weeks later when Kane galloped into town in the middle of the night. Bryn, awakened by the commotion, peered through her window to see him pounding on Doc Wilson's door, a limp figure draped across his horse. The next morning, she learned a young boy had been thrown from a horse on the trail near Kane's property. Kane had ridden 15 miles through the dark to bring him to the doctor, saving his life. When she saw Kane tying his horse outside the saloon that afternoon, Bryn marched across the street, ignoring the stares of townsfolk. "For someone trying to convince everyone he's fearsome, you certainly spend a lot of time saving people," she said, approaching him. Kane's eyes darted around, noticing the attention they were drawing. "Miss Daniels, this isn't proper. Neither is letting a child die when you could help." She smiled up at him. "The boy's mother is looking for you to thank you." "I don't need thanks." "Maybe not, but you deserve them." She hesitated. "Will you come to Sunday dinner? Pa and I would like to properly thank you as well." Kane looked genuinely startled. "Your father hates me." "He doesn't know you. None of them do." She gestured to the townspeople watching them. "But they're starting to wonder if they've been wrong." Kane stared at her for a long moment. "One meal, that's all." The dinner was awkward at first. Jacob Daniels was coldly polite. Kane barely spoke, and Bryn carried the conversation until her father reluctantly began asking about cattle prices. By the end of the meal, the tension had eased enough that when Bryn suggested Kane help her father repair the wagon out back, both men agreed. Over the next few weeks, Kane began stopping by the store more frequently. He never stayed long, but each visit revealed something new: his preference for peppermint candy, his deep knowledge of horses, the book of poetry she once glimpsed in his saddlebag. The town noticed. Whispers followed Bryn in church, and more than one person warned her father about that O'Malley fellow. But something was changing. When Kane stopped a runaway wagon from crashing into the schoolhouse, people nodded to him on the street. When he brought in a wounded wolf pup and asked Doc Wilson to treat it, children began watching for him from windows. One evening in late summer, Bryn was closing the store when Kane appeared, a wildflower in his gloved hand. "I saw this and thought of you," he said awkwardly. Bryn took it, her fingers brushing his glove. "Thank you," she hesitated. "Would you walk with me, just to the edge of town? The sunset is beautiful tonight." To her surprise, he agreed. As they walked along the dusty road, she gathered her courage. "Kane, may I ask you something personal?" His body tensed. "Depends on the question. The rumors about why you never—" She faltered. "About your shirt." Kane stopped walking. "Brynn, there are things about me you shouldn't ask, because they're true, or because you're afraid of what I'll think. Both." His voice was barely audible. She touched his arm gently. "Whatever it is, it wouldn't change how I see you." Kane looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It would." He stepped back. "I should go." "Kane, good night, Miss Daniels." 2 days later, Bryn was counting inventory when Sheriff Taylor entered the store, his face grim. "Miss Daniels, I need to speak with you about Kane O'Malley." Her heart sank. "What's happened?" "Nothing yet, but there's trouble coming." The sheriff removed his hat. "3 men rode into town this morning asking about him. I recognize them. They rode with the Fletcher gang a few years back. The outlaws. What do they want with Kane? That's what concerns me. O'Malley's past isn't as clean as he'd have you believe." Sheriff Taylor lowered his voice. "I've kept quiet because he's been no trouble, but if these men are looking for him, it could mean violence." "You don't know that," Bryn protested. "I know enough to warn you to be careful. Your father's concerned, and so am I." After the sheriff left, Bryn closed early and rode out to Kane's ranch. She found him mending a fence, his horse grazing nearby. "You shouldn't be here," he said when he saw her. "The sheriff says there are men looking for you. Outlaws." Kane's face hardened. "All the more reason for you to leave." "Not until you tell me the truth," she insisted. "Were you an outlaw too?" Kane was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "I was. For 3 years after the war." He met her eyes. "I've killed men, Bryn. Not just in self-defense. And these men, are they here for revenge? Most likely." He removed his gloves, revealing calloused hands. "I left that life behind, but some things follow you." "Let the sheriff help you." Kane laughed bitterly. "The law, they'd as soon hang me as those men." "Then run," she pleaded. "I'm done running." His expression softened. "But you need to go. Forget me, Bryn. Find someone worthy of you. I already have." The words escaped before she could stop them. Kane stared at her, conflict raging in his eyes. Then slowly he reached for her, his bare hand cupping her cheek. The touch was electric, and Bryn leaned into it, her heart pounding. "I've never met anyone like you," he whispered. "Then fight for this," she urged. "For us." But the moment shattered as hoofbeats thundered in the distance. Kane pushed her toward his horse. "Ride back to town. Now." "Kane, please, Bryn. If you care for me at all, go." With tears blurring her vision, she mounted his horse and rode away, looking back to see him drawing his pistol as 3 riders approached. For 2 days, Fort Worth buzzed with rumors. Some said Kane O'Malley had killed 3 men. Others said he'd been shot and left for dead. Sheriff Taylor rode out but returned saying only that there'd been trouble settled and no bodies to bury. On the 3rd day, as Bryn was closing the store, the bell jingled. Kane stood there, a bruise darkening his jaw, a cut above his eye. "You're alive," she breathed. "They won't be back, did you?" "No, just convinced them I wasn't worth the trouble." He stepped forward. "Bryn, I'm leaving." Her heart seemed to stop. "Why? There'll be others. As long as I stay, you're in danger." "So I don't get a say in this." Anger flared through her grief. "You decide what's best for me. I'm trying to protect you." "I don't need your protection," she snapped. "I need your trust, your truth." Kane stared at her, conflict raging in his eyes. Then he made a decision. "Come with me." "What?" "To my ranch. Tonight I'll show you why I have to leave." His voice dropped. "Why no one should be near me." When she arrived at his ranch that evening, Kane was waiting on the porch, his face shadowed. He led her inside to a sparsely furnished room with a single oil lamp. "Before I show you," he said, his voice strained, "you need to understand. I was young and stupid after the war. Fell in with bad men. We robbed banks, trains. Then one night in New Mexico, we raided the wrong ranch. Bryn sat perfectly still, afraid any movement might stop his words. It belonged to a former Union officer. He'd brought back war weapons, experimental ones. When we broke in, there was a fight. Something exploded. Kane's hands trembled. The others died instantly. I didn't. Slowly, Kane began unbuttoning his shirt. The doctor said I should have died too. Sometimes I wish I had. As the fabric parted, Bryn gasped. Kane's chest and arms were covered with burned scars, deep, twisted tissue that looked like a map of hell itself. The scarring continued around his sides and back. Some places so badly damaged the skin was permanently discolored. "It's across 70% of my body," Kane said quietly. The pain was unbearable at first, still is some days. He kept his eyes downcast. People who saw it said I was marked by the devil, a punishment for my sins. Bryn stood and moved toward him. Kane flinched but didn't retreat. "Does it still hurt?" she whispered. "Yes." "The damaged skin pulls and cracks. Sunlight makes it worse. Cold too." Gently she raised her hand. "May I?" Kane nodded almost imperceptibly. With trembling fingers, Bryn touched the scarred skin of his shoulder. It was rough under her fingertips, tight and uneven. Kane's breath hitched. "I understand if you're disgusted," he said hoarsely. Instead of answering, Bryn leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to a scar on his chest, right above his heart. When she pulled back, tears were streaming down Kane's face. "I've been alone so long," he whispered. "You don't have to be any more." She took his hands. "These scars don't define you, Kane. Your actions do, and you've shown me what kind of man you truly are." For the first time since she'd known him, Kane smiled, a real smile that transformed his face, lightening the burden in his eyes. "I don't deserve you," he said. "Good thing that's not for you to decide," Bryn replied, smiling through her own tears. The next morning, Fort Worth awoke to shocking news. Brynn Daniels had spent the night at Kane O'Malley's ranch. By noon, her father was pounding on Kane's door, shotgun in hand. "You've ruined my daughter," Jacob shouted. "Pa, stop," Bryn stepped between them. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" "The whole town is talking," Kane stepped forward. "Mr. Daniels, I love your daughter. I intend to marry her if she'll have me." Jacob's jaw dropped. Bryn turned to Kane, her eyes wide. "Is that a proposal?" she asked. Kane knelt awkwardly, his scarred body protesting. "Brynn Daniels, will you marry me? I can't offer much, but I swear I'll spend every day trying to deserve you." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." Jacob lowered his shotgun. "She's all I have left," he said quietly. "I know," Kane replied. "I'll protect her with my life." 2 weeks later, on a crisp September morning, Brynn Daniels became Brynn O'Malley in a small ceremony outside the town church. Few people attended: her father, Sheriff Taylor, Doc Wilson and his wife, and surprisingly, old Mrs. Wilcox, who said she'd never missed a wedding in Fort Worth and wasn't about to start now. Kane wore a new shirt, still fully buttoned despite the warm day, but his eyes never left Bryn's face as they spoke their vows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kane hesitated before kissing her, acutely aware of the watching eyes. Bryn solved his dilemma by rising on her toes to press her lips firmly to his. Someone later identified as the blacksmith's son shouted, "He's touched now," which sent Mrs. Wilcox into scandalized fluttering and made even Jacob Daniels crack a reluctant smile. Their wedding night was a revelation for both. Kane was hesitant, ashamed of his scars in the lamplight, but Bryn showed him with words and touch that his body was nothing to fear, that she loved all of him. When they came together, it was with a tenderness neither had expected to find in this hard frontier world. Life settled into a rhythm. Kane continued running his small cattle operation, now with Brynn beside him. She convinced him to hire 2 young cowboys who needed work, brothers who'd lost their parents to fever. Under Kane's gruff but fair guidance, they flourished, and the ranch began to prosper. Brynn rode into town regularly to help her father with the store. At first, people stared and whispered behind their hands about O'Malley's wife. But as months passed, their curiosity faded. Kane still rarely came to town, and when he did, he remained fully covered, but his marriage to Brynn had changed something fundamental in how people perceived him. One evening in early spring, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Kane said, "I never thought I'd have this." "Have what?" Brynn asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Peace. A home that feels like home." He kissed her head. "You? Well, you're stuck with me now, cowboy," she teased. Kane's expression grew serious. "Brynn, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped. "What is it?" "Doc Wilson thinks there might be new treatments for scars like mine in Philadelphia." He took her hand. "He's written to a specialist he studied with." Hope bloomed in her chest. "Could they help with the pain?" "Maybe. It's experimental. Skin grafting, they call it." Kane looked uncertain. "It would mean leaving for several months." "Then we'll go." Kane shook his head. "The ranch will still be here when we return," Brynn insisted. "The brothers can manage it." "This is your health, Kane. Our future." That night, as she traced the scars on his back with gentle fingers, Brynn realized how completely her life had changed in less than a year. The mysterious cowboy nobody dared to touch had become her husband, her lover, her best friend. "I used to have nightmares," Kane murmured into the darkness. "Every night since the explosion. But since you've been sharing my bed, they've stopped." Brynn kissed his shoulder. "Maybe love is the best medicine after all." Kane rolled over to face her. "I've been thinking. If this treatment works, if the pain lessens. Would you want children someday?" The question caught her by surprise. They hadn't discussed it, both tacitly understanding that Kane's condition made the physical demands of parenting difficult. "I would," she admitted. "But only if you're ready." Kane pulled her closer. "With you, I'm starting to believe anything is possible." 2 months later, they boarded a train east, leaving the wide Texas sky behind. Philadelphia was a shock, crowded, noisy, so different from the open spaces of home. The specialist, Dr. Harrison, was cautiously optimistic after examining Kane's scars. "The tissue is severely damaged, but not beyond hope," he explained. "We've had success with similar cases, particularly war veterans. The treatments were painful. Skin grafting, taking healthy skin from one area to replace damaged tissue elsewhere, was still experimental. But Dr. Harrison had refined his techniques." Kane endured it silently, his only concession to pain the tightening of his grip on Brynn's hand. They rented rooms near the hospital, and between treatments, Brynn showed Kane a world he'd never known: theater performances, art museums, bookshops where they'd spend hours browsing. For the first time, Kane experienced life without everyone staring at him in fear or suspicion. In the anonymous city, he was just another man with his wife. After 3 months, the results were noticeable. The grafts had taken well on his chest and arms, the new skin pink but healthy. More importantly, the constant pain had diminished significantly. "You can continue treatments, Doctor," Harrison told them. "But I believe you've received the maximum benefit for the most severely affected areas. The scars will always be visible, but the functionality and comfort should be much improved." On their last night in Philadelphia, Kane took Brynn to dinner at a restaurant finer than any she'd seen in Texas. He wore a shirt with the collar unbuttoned, a small thing for most men, but for Kane, it was monumental. "I've been thinking," he said as they ate, "about the future." "And what do you see?" Brynn asked. expansion. The ranch has potential. With the pain reduced, I could work longer hours, take on more cattle. His eyes held hers. Build a bigger house for a family. Bryn smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. They returned to Fort Worth to find their ranch flourishing under the brothers' care. Kane, moving more freely than before, threw himself into work with new energy. He still wore long sleeves and kept his shirt buttoned in public, but at home with Bryn, he began to shed his protective layers. Summer came, bringing scorching heat. One Sunday, as they picnicked by the creek on their property, Kane did something that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. He removed his shirt entirely, letting the sun touch his scarred skin. "Does it hurt?" Bryn asked, watching him. "Less than before," he stretched cautiously. "It feels strange. Good strange." Later that afternoon, Kane surprised her again by wading into the creek. "Join me," he called, water lapping at his waist. Laughing, Bryn hitched up her skirt and stepped in. The cool water was heaven in the Texas heat. Kane pulled her against him, both of them half-clothed, and kissed her deeply. "I never thought I'd feel normal again," he confessed. "You gave that back to me, Bryn." That night, as moonlight filtered through their bedroom window, Kane made love to her with a freedom he'd never shown before, his body no longer something to hide or endure, but to celebrate. Autumn brought change again. Bryn's morning sickness confirmed what they'd both suspected: a baby was coming in the spring. Kane's joy was tempered with fear. What if I can't be a good father? What if the child is frightened by my scars? Bryn took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Our child will love you because you're their father. Children don't see with the same eyes as adults." As her belly grew, so did their hopes. Kane expanded the ranch, hiring 2 more hands. Jacob Daniels, now fully reconciled to his son-in-law, helped them add 2 rooms to the house. The town's attitude continued to shift. Kane was now Bryn's husband rather than that scarred outlaw. Sheriff Taylor even asked for Kane's help tracking rustlers, recognizing that his past gave him insight into criminal movements. Kane agreed reluctantly, but returned with a newfound purpose. "I never thought I'd work on the right side of the law," he told Bryn that night. "Feels good." Winter settled over the land, and Bryn grew heavier with child. On Christmas Eve, snow-dusted Fort Worth, a rare enough occurrence that people called it a blessing. Kane and Bryn hosted dinner for her father and their ranch hands, the house warm with food and laughter. After everyone had gone, Kane sat beside the fire, watching his wife doze in the rocking chair he'd made for her. "You ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Marrying me?" Bryn opened her eyes. "Never, not for a single moment. Even with all the talk, the stares when we go to town, people will always talk," she smiled. "But they're talking less now, haven't you noticed? You're becoming just another rancher with a pregnant wife." Kane laughed. "Just what I always wanted to be." The baby arrived on a stormy April night. Kane paced outside the bedroom as Doc Wilson and the midwife attended Bryn, his heart stopping with every cry of pain. After what seemed an eternity, the doctor emerged. "Congratulations," he said, smiling wearily. "You have a healthy son." Kane entered the bedroom with trembling legs. Bryn lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle in her arms. "Come meet your son," she whispered. Kane approached cautiously, as if the baby might disappear. When Bryn placed the tiny, red-faced infant in his arms, his scarred hands looked huge and clumsy against the delicate new life. "He's perfect," Kane breathed, awe in his voice. They named him Matthew Jacob O'Malley, and from his first day he changed everything. Kane discovered that a baby cared nothing for scars, only for the safety of his father's arms and the deep voice that soothed his cries. As Matthew grew, Kane found himself caring less about who saw his scars. What mattered was being able to lift his son high, to teach him to ride, to swim in the creek on hot summer days. By Matthew's first birthday, Kane occasionally went without his duster in town. People still noticed his scars when his sleeves rode up, but they also noticed how he lifted his son onto his shoulders, how he helped old Mrs. Wilcox with her packages, how he'd become one of the most respected ranchers in the county. 2 years later, Brynn gave birth to twin girls Catherine and Elizabeth, who grew into fearless toddlers with their mother's auburn hair and their father's green eyes. The ranch prospered, and Kane built the bigger house he'd promised, with a special porch swing wide enough for Brynn to sit beside him as they watched their children play. One evening, as the Texas sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Kane found Brynn standing alone by the corral. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping his arms around her waist. "The day you rode into town and saved my father." She turned in his arms. "How everyone was so afraid to go near you," Kane smiled. "And now?" "Now Matthew has half the children in Fort Worth fighting to sit next to Mr. O'Malley when you tell stories at the schoolhouse." It was true. Kane had recently begun visiting the school, showing the children how to identify animal tracks and teaching them about ranching. His scars had become simply another feature of the man they knew, like Sheriff Taylor's limp or Doc Wilson's spectacles. "I never thought I'd have this life," Kane said, looking at their home, their land, their children playing in the yard. "I thought those scars marked me for a life of pain and loneliness." "They marked you for me," Brynn replied. "I just had to be brave enough to see past what everyone else feared." Kane kissed her softly. "I love you, Brynn O'Malley, and I love you, my untouchable cowboy." She smiled against his lips. "Although you seem pretty touchable to me." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Kane thought about how far they'd come. The physical scars would always remain, but the invisible ones, the wounds of isolation, shame, and fear, had healed. In their place was something he'd never dared to imagine. A family, a community, a life filled with purpose. The town that had once whispered about the cowboy nobody dared to touch now pointed to the O'Malley Ranch as an example of what determination and love could build on the Texas frontier. Children who once ran from Kane now begged for rides on his shoulders. Men who had avoided his gaze now sought his advice on cattle and horses. And Brynn, who had risked everything to love him, had created with him a legacy more powerful than any past sins or physical scars, a family built on acceptance, courage, and unwavering devotion. "What are you thinking about?" Brynn murmured sleepily against his chest. Kane smiled in the darkness. "About how some things that seem like curses turn out to be blessings in disguise. Like marrying the most feared man in Fort Worth," she teased. "Like being brave enough to show someone your worst scars," he replied, "and discovering they love you not despite them, but with them as part of who you are." Brynn raised herself on one elbow to look at him, her face silvered by moonlight. "Our children will grow up knowing that true strength isn't about hiding pain, but about having the courage to live fully despite it." Kane touched her face gently. "You taught me that." "We taught each other," she corrected him, "and we'll keep teaching each other for the rest of our lives." Outside, the Texas wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. Inside, Kane O'Malley, once the untouchable, scarred outlaw of Fort Worth, held his wife close and fell asleep without nightmares, surrounded by the family that had finally, completely healed him. Years later, when their children were grown and starting families of their own, Bryn and Kane would sit on that same porch swing, watching grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once laughed. Kane's scars had faded somewhat with time, and he rarely thought about them anymore. They were simply part of the story, their story of how a curious young woman had dared to look beyond rumors and fear, to find the man beneath the scars. And on warm summer evenings, the residents of Fort Worth would sometimes see Kane O'Malley riding through town with his shirt sleeves rolled up, nodding to neighbors, completely at ease in his own skin. The man nobody once dared to touch had become a respected elder, a beloved grandfather, and living proof that in the unforgiving landscape of the West, love could be the greatest healer of all.